Reverend Gregory Holston. I'm a senior advisor in the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and we're here to present a report that we've been working on for almost 2 years, the Racial Injustice Report. And so I'm going to just give a few minutes about what this report is in terms of its history. The reality is that as we stand here on this Juneteenth, the words of Oberle, who founded Juneteenth, stand in my mind. A week ago, she said, right here in Philadelphia, yes, we celebrate the end of slavery, but we're still not free. We still don't have the freedoms and equality and justice that every citizen of this country is born with. I'm reminded also of the words of Bryan Stevenson, the head of Equal Justice Initiative, who said, slavery hasn't ended, it has merely evolved. Evolved from a history of convict leasing in the 1880s, where people were found on trumped-up charges and forced to do labor on those same plantations they were supposed to have escaped from. That Jim Crow and lynching and terror that we faced in the 1900s and the 1920s meant that we still weren't free. That even things that still exist today but started in the 1930s, redlining and other ways of restricting the ability of black and brown people from having the basic economic freedom and justice we deserve, existed with intentional racism and has created the conditions that we call the inner city today. And even after the civil rights movement of the 1960s, when so many of those things were being dismantled, something else was evolving, raising its head in our communities. It was called the war on drugs, which one of the particular in the White House, one of the aides in the White House said it very clearly. That was never a war on drugs. It was always a war on black and brown people. It was always a war to undermine and corrupt and destabilize the black community, to never allow a movement like the civil rights movement to rise again. So we live with the legacy of that. 50 years of that legacy is the evolution of slavery, which we call today mass incarceration. And we stand here behind this monument here in this Eastern Penitentiary, trying to change a life of destruction. This institution is trying to change it to give a life of hope. That we stand behind a graph here, a monument here, to what we're doing in terms of incarceration. And when we look at these numbers and we see what it was in the 1970s, this small number behind me here was one level of incarceration. But we look and turn and see these higher numbers here of 2000 and 2010 and 2020, we recognize that we have 5 times, 6 times, 7 times, 8 times the amount of people incarcerated. And if the mission of the war on drugs was to criminalize the black community, in many ways, it has done exactly that. We have over 300,000 returning citizens right here in Philadelphia, most of them black and brown people. We have been criminalized, but we have not been defeated. For a movement of change has happened, and if we look at the very end of that graph, we'll see that the numbers have gone down a little bit, because since 2010, there's been a movement for change in our community to address this new evolution of slavery. And that movement is starting to make dents, but you can see it's still much more that we have to do. This report is written with that in mind, to lay out what we've already done. This DA has been a part of this movement, to lay out what we've done, but also to say how much more we have to do. To say that we're not perfect, but we got much more to do. And we're going to have to do it together. This can't be a DA's office by itself. This can't be a DA just making decisions by himself. He needs a movement, the same movement that put him in, to change the laws across our state, across our city, and across our country, so that these racial disparities can come down, to these amounts of people who are incarcerated can come down, and that we can talk again about that we're at levels in the 1970s or even more. So we're here to establish this report today to say, no, this is not an end, that this is a beginning for moving forward together for that kind of change, with the kind of data, the kind of research that we need to prove the point, but also the movement of people on the ground that will change the minds and hearts of those black and white across this nation and across this state, to build a better country, to really have the kinds of communities, the multiracial communities that we deserve, that all our schools can be fairly funded, all of the things that we fight for, that we can win on this together. And so I thank you for being here today, and now I want to introduce our district attorney, who has been in the fight, who has a tough chin, who knows how to be in a fight and keep on fighting. Let's hear it for our district attorney, because this report never happened before and never would happen unless a man like this was in this office. Our district attorney, Larry Krasner.
So as usual, I get way too much credit, and I don't really deserve it. But I do want to make sure there's some credit for Reverend Holston. There's some credit for the Data Lab, which is a grant-funded group within the DA's office that has been working up the numbers now ever since our administration started. The numbers. This report puts numbers to a problem. In no way does it solve that problem. In no way does it seek to tell everybody what needs to be done. We don't know. We do not know what needs to be done. But the only way to fix a problem is to measure it and to put numbers to it, and then to invite in the people who have the answers. And those people are community. And those people are community leaders. And those people are elected officials, at least the ones who truly care, like the ones we have here today. This is a start of a process. It puts numbers to a problem. It admits that the problem is there, but in no way does it solve it. Yes, it contains some suggestions about areas we may look at. And here's the news there. They might not be the ones you're expecting. When you have a system where over 30 people have been exonerated, almost all of them truly innocent, even though they spent decades in jail, when you have a system where nearly all of those people are black and brown, then maybe you need science to solve crimes. Because where there are not facts, there is racism. And where there are not facts and there is not truth, there is untruth. And untruth is what has gotten us here today. If you look behind me, and by the way, I love this museum. I love this museum. The Eastern State Penitentiary is a fascinating place, and I don't know if you know this, but almost 300,000 people come here every year. They decide that what they want to do with their vacation time and their vacation money is go to jail. That's what they decided. And they decided that because there is so much truth here. What is happening here is so important to the United States. It's such an essential part of our history. They need to be here. I think that this beautiful sculpture behind us is just one example of what a great museum this is. But I got some news for you that ain't pretty. That's too small. If you're looking at Pennsylvania, if we just did Pennsylvania, not the whole United States federal and state court, if you just did Pennsylvania, it would dwarf this. It would be so much higher. Pennsylvania right now, you're looking at a place where the jail population, the prison population has increased by a factor of 800% increase that made us no safer whatsoever. That's what we have done in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So if we can do this, if we can come up with a report with all of the brilliant people who worked on this, that does nothing more than put numbers to a problem, that provides a foundation so we can try to build a house on it, when what we have right now with criminal justice is a structure built on a broken foundation, and that broken foundation is racism. And it is, by the way, also the oppression of poor people, which is a closely related phenomenon. if we can put numbers to the problem and start a process where we invite everyone, and I mean everyone, I mean the police department, I mean government, I mean community leaders, I mean people like these great elected officials here, I mean people who've been in the system. There's a lot of people who've been in the system sitting here, including people who actually served time in this prison when it was still functioning, way back in the late 1960s. If we can bring all of those people to the table and say, how do we get somewhere from here, then maybe we can improve things a little bit. I still remember in 2017 when I foolishly decided to run for DA, and they said to me, is the system racist? And I said, yeah, because the system was racist. Well, it still is. And basically all the people I was running against, when they were asked the same question, either said, no, oh my, no, or they said, well, it depends on what you mean by racist. No, the system is racist. It was then, it is now. We haven't fixed that. We're not going to be able to fix that in any way all by ourselves. We're nothing but, a bunch of technicians trying to work within a society where the rich are getting richer, and most black and brown people are not rich, where we have high levels of residential segregation. Philadelphia, last I checked, was the fourth most segregated city. And those are based very specifically and purposefully on exclusionary zoning practices to make sure we don't get certain kinds of people, poor people, black people, brown people, near affluent white people. That's the truth. We live in a country where the insanity of having different levels of funding for students in public school exists, and that is insanity, and it is disgraceful, and it is shameful, and that is how you get to this situation. So without my going on and on, other than to say I truly appreciate the hospitality of Eastern State Penitentiary. If you haven't been here, come here. This is an absolutely fabulous museum. I appreciate at every level the folks who have gathered with us here for us to do little more than put numbers to a problem, because those are the same folks who are going to be actively involved in trying to address that problem, improve our situation with that problem, and do all kinds of stuff that never could be done by any criminal justice actor on their own. Thank you very much for being here. I truly appreciate it. I hope the heat doesn't get you. But on the other hand, I hope what we're doing here causes a little heat, because there's some people need to get got when it comes to racism and criminal justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Wes Weaver. I'm the Director of Analytics at the District Attorney's Transparency and Analytics Lab. That's Data Lab for short. The Data Lab was established in 2019. We're a unit dedicated to research and analytics using data across Philadelphia's criminal justice system to inform decision making and advance public accountability. This report was 3 years in the making. Many different people worked on this report. I'd like to acknowledge some of them if I can. I am not the primary author of the report. Let me be clear. I'm speaking for a team of people, and I want to make sure they're recognized, including Tyler Tran, Yasmin Ayala Johnson, Christian Smith, Tyrell Mann Barnes, Kate Kelly, CJ Ariata, Dr. Oren Gurr, and Michael Hollander. We're also grateful to the many assistant district attorneys and DO staff that contributed by providing feedback. And finally, this report would not be possible without the trust and expertise of researchers and community members that we reach out to, and they provided really important feedback. And I would especially like to thank Timothy Welbeck at Temple University's Center for Anti-Racism and Dr. Talitha Washington at the Atlanta University Center Consortium. So this report began in 2020 with a question: could we describe systemic racial disparities in Philadelphia's criminal justice system and identify where they were introduced and how, if at all, they were addressed? We analyzed data from 290,000 criminal cases charged between 2015 and 2022, all in Philadelphia, and identified 5 key touch points in the system. They are stop and arrest, charging, bail and pretrial detention, case outcomes, and sentencing and incarceration. This report focuses mainly on the 8 most commonly charged offenses and does not focus, although we include some information on some of the more serious but less common offenses, such as homicide. Overall, the data confirmed what communities of color have known for decades, that The system's negative impacts fell most heavily on Black and Latinx communities. Our archival research, there's a large archival section in the report, showed that these conditions are closely related to broader structural inequality and racism that shapes our society. During the study's 8-year time period, Black Philadelphians made up just under 40% of the population, but nearly 70% of police stops and more than 60% of arrests. Of those who are stopped, people who are Latinx and Blacks are frisked and searched 1.5 times more frequently than people who are white, and 3 times more frequently than those who are Asian American or Pacific Islander. When stopped and searched, Black individuals were on average the least likely group to be found with any contraband. Disproportionalities at later stages of the criminal process largely reflect those that were created at arrest and influenced by the perceived seriousness of the crime. Black and Latinx defendants are on average more likely to be charged with felonies, which carry guidelines that demand harsh sentencing. Black people represent 65% of people sentenced to incarceration, more than 70% of people sentenced to 2 or more years, but only 57% of those convicted, and they're most likely to have their case dismissed or withdrawn or to be acquitted. Similar disparities exist among victims of crime. While widely available victimization data is unfortunately not very available, we looked at data on fatal and non-fatal shooting victims and found that the people most impacted by gun violence were Black and Latinx. Our system treats offenses that occur most commonly in the poorest neighborhoods of the city with a degree of severity much greater than the wealthiest. As the DA and Reverend Holston highlighted, Black and Latinx neighborhoods have experienced systemic disinvestment for generations. Research shows time and time again that positive, sustained investment in neighborhoods experiencing the most crime is the most effective crime prevention strategy for the long term. Over the course of this analysis, we found difficulties with the data that's available to us in the city. Philadelphia Justice Agencies record very few racial categories, and the accuracy of which we don't know. Systems rarely share data, and they rarely share complete data if they do. And there is very little data on the race or economic circumstances of crime victims. These problems hinder our ability to act collectively as a city. But despite these limitations, publicly available and reliable data is crucial for promoting transparency, accountability, and evidence-based decision-making. The Data Lab's work here to consolidate this data across multiple city agencies has enabled us to release new data to the public. So I'm happy to announce that moving forward, all data available for download on the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office Public Data Dashboard will include the defendant's race as a variable. This can be accessed at data.philadao.com. By releasing this report and making that data available for the public, this office is taking greater responsibility for the information gap and the information gaps that plague the entire system. And consulting with impacted communities to improve data quality and accessibility is an important next step towards implementing fair and data-driven policies that reduce racial inequality. Thanks.
So we'll have several speakers coming up doing about 2 minutes each on their ideas and their thoughts around the report. First, I want to introduce Councilwoman Jamie Gaultier, who's going to come and share. Why don't you come with us?
Good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks to DA Larry Krasner for the opportunity to join you and say a few words today, and more importantly, for the important report that you are releasing on this Juneteenth day. Juneteenth is a celebration of the end of slavery and the resiliency of Black people, and it should also be a reminder that we see the impacts of slavery all around us. Black Philadelphians descended from enslaved Africans endure racism that's baked into the very foundation of our city and society. Because not only did the government never atone for its original sin of American slavery, but for generations after the Civil War, General Order No. 3, and the 14th Amendment, lawmakers enacted and encouraged policies that subjugated Black residents to second-class citizenship. And when combined with intentional massive disinvestment in Black communities through redlining and other practices, and aggressive racially biased policing, we land here in 2023, shining a light on how the criminal legal system has also wronged us. The report shows that severe racial bias exists in every part of the criminal legal system. Black people are policed more, arrested more, charged more, incarcerated more, and sentenced more severely. Across the board, our outcomes suffer in a criminal legal system that can tie its very roots to the enslavement of Black bodies. Even our children can't escape this fate. As we speak, the Juvenile Justice Center in West Philadelphia is literally bursting at the seams with so many young people that there is nowhere for them to sleep comfortably. And so on this Juneteenth, let us shine a light on these lasting impacts of slavery, but also recommit ourselves to redress and to justice in a way that will finally allow Black people to be free in our own country. This report is one very important step forward. And in line with this theme of justice, just last week, Councilmember Brooks and myself introduced a resolution in City Council to create a reparations task force to study the role that Philadelphia should play in reparations for Black Philadelphians. Because the justice that we seek in this country, in this city, must be broad. It includes change in the criminal legal system, but so much more. It includes safe schools. It includes housing for all and housing justice. It includes clean, green blocks that everyone is able to live on. It includes economic opportunity. Because if what ails us is the disinvestment in our people, then the only way out is investment. Investment in our people, investment in our communities. I look forward to working with DA Larry Krasner and his entire team, our community, and every stakeholder who worked on this report to move towards the justice that Black and brown people in this city truly deserve. Thank you so much.
How everybody doing this evening? All right. First of all, I would like to say that I commend Larry Krasner in the work that he has been doing in the city of Philadelphia. I know he don't like to hear so much praises, but we got to give him where praise is due. I work here at Eastern State Penitentiary. Okay, I'm a formerly incarcerated individual who served over a decade in prison. All right, recently exonerated within the last 2 years. Upon my exoneration, I was given an opportunity to work here at Eastern State Penitentiary. And in working here, I was given the opportunity to become a supervisor, okay? And one of the things that Larry Krasner spoke on was that in order for us to succeed as a whole, you got to allow those who have been impacted to have a seat at the table, okay? You can't fix something thinking that you can read a book, you know, and can solve our problems. You got to allow us to sit at the table. And what Eastern State has done is allow me to sit at the table. And in sitting at the table, what I have learned is that for years, they have been doing programs here at Eastern State Prison designed and geared towards helping the community, you know, learn all about mass incarceration, recidivism, and how the racial justice system has impacted the community, okay? And what I have been doing is basically putting that word out there, okay? But Eastern State has created 2 programs that I'm familiar with. One is the Preservation Trade Center, and one is the Lead Fellowship Program that I currently run. And what I do is I go back into the prison system to help those men and women who are about to come home, to help them find living wages. And I partner up. What Larry Krasner has talked about is the community. Eastern State has partnered with ICJ, Kelly Roscoe, Tony from Adela's House, Brother Shakabona from Human Rights Coalition, and other many organizations to be able to bring these organizations into the fold, have a seat at the table, and help these men and women make a change in their lives. This is what Eastern State is doing. And so when you want to know what Eastern State is doing as a museum, They've been doing this for over 200 years. And what do I mean by that? This institution started in 1829 when it opened its doors to the first African American who was incarcerated here. It was a tourist site then. Over 400 people used to come in here and visit, okay? Today, I feel as though Eastern State, as well as the DA office, has a responsibility to go back into the community and help those men and women who are returning home, okay? Because of the mass incarceration that has impacted the community. And that's what they both are doing. No one, and I'm from Philadelphia. Some of y'all may be transplants to Philadelphia, but I am Philadelphia. And I can say I seen it from black to white in the DA's office. No one has done what this man has done. No one. You know? And I'm saying that to say that when I look at the work that Eastern State has done, no museum is doing and putting in the work that they are doing here. And we have to acknowledge that today is Juneteenth. Liberation. Liberation. A lot of us is out partying. You know? Some of us, you know, it's not losing focus and keeping our eyes on the prize. That's not to say we can't party, you know? But right now, we got to keep our eyes on the prize, brother. Thank y'all.
Thank you, brother.
Good afternoon, everyone. All right, let me just jump up a little bit. Well, I am Councilmember Kendra Brooks, and when I got asked to speak today, once I got here, I thought about what would I talk about. And I just want to start, like, for me, joy is resistance. And as we sit behind these walls, and I see some of my fellow brothers that have recently come home, and in some of the speeches earlier, they talked about how people pay to vacation to come here. Wouldn't be my choice. I've been on vacation and almost got locked up, but that's a whole nother story. I think about liberation and freedom. And when I think about the work that we're doing in City Council, myself and Councilmember Gautier, and shout out to DA Larry Krasner for putting this report together, I think about where research meets policy, right? Our liberation and freedom for black folks in this city starts with research, ends up being policy, and then we can see real change. So what I want to say is thank you for the so many community members that I see in the crowd, so many of my fellow brothers that are recently home and sisters that are doing the work right now, every day, to make sure that once you're free, you're continually free. And I also want to thank the folks who come on the front end that make sure that our young people, our seniors, and our community have all the resources that we have necessary for us to be free. So when I think about this report and what the outcomes could bring, I just think about all the research that we need to create this reparation task force. I think about the years of work that I've done voluntarily and then now in council to make sure that investments are made in communities before our young folks have to be incarcerated, before they hit our juvenile justice system. And to me, that's what I celebrate here on Juneteenth. And I want to say thank you to Larry Krasner for creating the research that's needed to lead the policies that we want to move forward over the next couple of years. And I also want to say today is Juneteenth, and I agree. Right now, we're doing this as an act of resistance and joy, but I do celebrate you guys. Go fill in time with your family, and remember, family is the root to our culture. So after you do all your Juneteenth things, make sure you go back and love on your family and your community as a reminder that liberation and freedom go hand in hand. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. Buenas tardes. My name is Will Gonzalez. I'm the Executive Director of SEBA. I want to thank the DA's office and its leader, Larry Krasner, for starting this process. It's the start of something important. I also want to acknowledge and thank the councilwomen here who are going to make things happen from this process onward. Because again, I think the basis is it's not just one institution, it's not just one person, it's a multi-pronged, denominational, multicultural effort to try to achieve this. We were blessed from the beginning to be part of this process. A number of meetings before even the first draft of the report came, frank discussions about the shortcomings of the data, and understanding that this data is not just produced by one entity in our criminal justice system, but by multiple entities, and the deliberate blindness that some of that data shows. No one is more blinder than he who does not want to see. And I think that the discussions that took place about how do we get better at data, we're in the 21st century. Private industry can have all types of data about commercial tastes, but we're afraid about talking about the needs in our community. This is a start at the local level. We hope that it grows at the state level. There's hope of that in Harrisburg. At the federal level, it needs to go ramp up. You can't do research on gun violence by law. What is that about? So this is the start of a great process of using data, using thought. Times are tough. It's not just the tough get tough, that's brute force. The tough get smart. And being smart is about knowledge. And getting data and communicating with people is about engagement and trying to produce solutions that are for the mutual benefit of everyone. And this report starts the process. There's some issues, but again, garbage in, garbage out. This is still good, but we need to get better at seeing what we need to do. And so this is a start, and I look forward to continuing to work on this issue. And I acknowledge Juneteenth, and Juneteenth was horrible in many, many, many ways. But you know what Juneteenth was also? Not having data. The data that, hey, you're a free man by law was denied from people. And so what we're trying to do is bring out more truth so we have more justice. Gracias.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Mohan Seshadri, and I'm the Executive Director of the Asian Pacific Islander Political Alliance, Pennsylvania's statewide Asian American civil rights advocacy organization. I want to start by thanking DA Krasner and the entire DA's office, not just for releasing the report, but especially for lifting up the history of disinvestment and predatory development as it pertains to our communities, especially Chinatown. For 150 years, Chinatown has been our people's cultural and spiritual home, and the fights to defend it from destruction have defined our community's relationships with city government and elected officials for generations. Telling the whole story by providing this kind of context, not just data and charts, but the histories of how we got there, is a crucial part of bringing visibility to communities and stories that have far too long been erased and invisible, even as these struggles continue today. This report is a necessary step in righting centuries of wrongs in Philadelphia's criminal legal system. The disparities it lays bare presents a call to action to all of us to recommit to the project of ending mass incarceration and discriminatory sentencing practices. At the same time, we know that it's just an initial step, and that the picture it presents will not be complete without a thorough overhauling of the city and the Commonwealth's data collection processes. Given the deep stratifications in our Asian American communities between class, ethnicity, immigration status, refugee history, and more, if we are to properly track these disparities, if we are to properly understand what's going on, we need a holistic top-to-bottom data equity approach that includes setting standards on data collection and disaggregating race and ethnicity data so that we can truly understand which members of our communities are doing okay and which members of our community are bearing the brunt of the weight of our carceral system. That said, it's more than anything, this report calls on us once again to be in solidarity with our Black communities here in Philadelphia. It's clear to us that the road to justice and self-determination for our communities and our neighborhoods runs through fighting for justice and self-determination for Black Philadelphians, whether the struggle is against displacement and gentrification, environmental pollution and public health inequity, or most relevantly, fighting mass incarceration, police brutality, and racism embedded in our government and our system. On Juneteenth, and on the 41st anniversary of the murder of Vincent Chin, we're here to lift up this report and the leaders who worked so hard to bring it to fruition. We're here to recommit to deep and real solidarity with our black and brown siblings here in Philly. And we're here to join the call for freedom and safety for all Philadelphians and the fight to build a Philly that works for all of us. Thank you and happy Juneteenth.
Good afternoon, everyone. I really don't need a mic. I want to thank the group that had everything to do with this, but more than that, I want to thank y'all for being out here. Because we could have been home in air conditioner, barbecuing, and doing everything. Instead, we're here. But guess what? More of us should be here. Because as long as we sit home comfortable and thinking it's their problem and not our problem, we're not going to get nowhere. We can write 1,000,000 reports, and if we don't put action behind it, we're going nowhere. As you can see, I got my Juneteenth. I thought about coming pretty. Then I say, heck with pretty. I want to represent freedom, because that's what it represents for me. I'm a mother of an only child that's been incarcerated since the age of 18. He's going to be 48, still incarcerated. And let me clarify, he didn't even take a life. But we know why he's in there. I fight not just for the men, but I also want to represent the women, because we got a tendency of men this and men that, and forget that we have just as many women, mothers, aunts, sisters, cousins, nieces that are rotting behind bars. You know, and if we had majority of these people out here, I call them mentors, we won't be losing so many of our young folks right now, because they can sit down and tell them what jail life really is. I grew up, believe it or not, roller skating behind this yard right here. I lived across the street, but I didn't know this was a prison. As far as I was concerned, it was just a building with men with long sticks. And as I grew older, I learned that those sticks were really guns, long guns. Little did I realize that I was not only going to experience the outside of a prison, but I was going to experience the inside of one. You know, I don't wish prison on no one. And I know if I don't have no enemies, but if I did, I wouldn't even wish prison on them. Because see, prison is a place where you go to rot. And if you're black and brown, you really go to rot, because you're working at 19 cents an hour, 25 cents an hour. And we're talking about freedom and slavery. Slavery is still here. That's just modern day slavery. They found a way to do it justly with the courts. So we as people, we need to wake up and start fighting with each other, not against each other. And let's remember, this fight, it takes all of us, not just a few of us, but all of us, regardless of the color of your skin. Because there's really only one race in the world, and that's the human race. Thank you.
Ma'am, could you identify yourself, please?
Well, my name is Lorraine Hall, better known to the insider as Mama Didi, and to everybody as Miss Didi. And I'm with CABI, Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration, Free the Ballot, HRC, a whole bunch, anything that has to do with people's rights. I'm there. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Didi.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, want to thank District Attorney Larry Krasner and Reverend Holston for inviting me to this event. Rome, I want to thank you and Eastern Penitentiary for hosting us. Like Ms. Didi, I grew up not too far from this prison, around 20th and Green. It was certainly a different neighborhood than it is today. But like many people probably up on this stage, I woke up this morning asking myself, what the hell am I doing getting up on Juneteenth, getting ready to go to a press conference in 90-degree weather? However, there's nowhere else I would rather be, actually, because to me, Juneteenth is not a celebration. To me, Juneteenth is a reminder. Juneteenth to me is a reminder that we have a lot of work to do dismantling the vestiges of slavery and Jim Crow in the United States, particularly within its criminal justice system. When I read this report, several things came to mind. As someone who was facing a death sentence at the age of 16 by the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, I'm reminded of past reports by the District Attorney's Office that these reports would usually center how many people the district attorney has sent to death row, how many people were sentenced to life without parole, how many people were sentenced to the prison system. To have a district attorney now that is issuing reports and centering, correcting the racial disparities in Philadelphia's criminal justice system is a reminder to me of how far we've come in this city, where we once had a district attorney that prided themselves on being America's deadliest DA, but our communities were no safer. We now have a district attorney that's actually centering community, and that's why there's so many community members here. And I like to say this is a community process. So while I appreciate the work that Larry Krasner is doing, a lot of this is a result of the pressure and the involvement of community members like myself and many people in this crowd here today. Another thing that came to mind when reading this is that 100 years ago, Du Bois wrote a book called The Philadelphia Negro. And many of the same injustices and disparities that are in this report, he wrote about over 100 years ago in Philadelphia. And so that's another reminder of how entrenched racism is, institutional racism is in this country. And so when I read this report, I walk away with this report as an invitation for us to get to work to remedy these injustices. And I find it fitting that we are having this press conference in a prison, because it's my wish that we turn more prisons in America into museums. Yeah. And we invest more into communities and schools and mental health trauma and healthcare, because this is how we're going to heal and make our communities safer. A district attorney cannot make our community safer. The police chief commissioner cannot make our community safer. The mayor cannot make our communities safer. It is those of us in this audience, it is the people in the community that are charged with the responsibility for making us safer. And it is elected officials like Larry Krasner who is charged with the responsibility of bringing us together to make those communities safer. So thank you for this report. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. And as you know, whenever you need me, I'm on call, and we're on call. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, oh yeah, also, sorry. My name is Robert Salim Holbrook. I'm the Executive Director of the Abolitionist Law Center.
Thank you, brother.
Let me start by saying that my name is Michael Cord, and I want to begin my 2-minute. They first told me I had 2 hours, now they tell me 2 minutes. So I'm going to stick to my 2 minutes first by thanking the man I call John Brown with the law degree, and that's Larry Krasner. And that's coming from me, Nat Turner, with a law degree. And we take that approach to dismantling the injustice system. My 2-minute presentation begins August 25, 1619, with the birth of American slavery as we know it. And then we fast forward 264 years to December 6, 1865, and people think that we got our freedom then, but we didn't get our freedom then, because if you read the 13th Amendment, it does not say slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, exclamation point. Doesn't say slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, period. It says slavery and involuntary servitude are hereby abolished, comma, except following the conviction of the crime. So what happened is the 13th Amendment was designed to re-enslave people. Initially, America enslaved us because we were black. Then they began to enslave us because we were convicts, but not real convicts. I got about, I don't know, a minute and a half left, so I'm going to throw some history in here. And it goes like this. We think that the North defeated the South in the Civil War, but it really didn't. There's so many examples to prove that, but let me go back to the 13th Amendment. Do you know that the 13th Amendment was drafted in large part by the Confederate officials? Don't believe me, do the research. The former Confederate vice president helped to draft the 13th Amendment. 4 former Confederate generals helped to draft the 13th Amendment. 5 former Confederate colonels helped to draft the 13th Amendment. 6 Confederate cabinet officers helped to draft the 13th Amendment. 58 former Confederate congressional members drafted it. So what the hell did you think the 13th Amendment was going to say? It was going to say exactly what it said. People think that black folks got their freedom with the Emancipation Proclamation. They didn't. 13th Amendment. They didn't. Juneteenth. They didn't. We still haven't. Because if you look at all of those events, even after that, we had convict leasing. Even after that, we had black codes. Even after that, we had disenfranchisement. Even after that, we had redlining. Even after that, we had mass incarceration. Now, here's the thing. My final, 37 seconds. People always accuse me of playing the race card. And I say I plead guilty because I do play the race card because America dealt from a race deck. But every now and then, we get somebody who comes along, like a Larry Krasner, and looks at the system and decides to fight against it. And that report, I mean, I believe Larry Krasner has done so much as DA, but for me, nothing is more important as this report, because it's not an ending, it's a beginning to tear the scab off of the racism and the classism that exists in America. I think I got 27 seconds left, so I'm gonna put it all together. In regard to the 13th Amendment, we need to support what's known as the Abolition Amendment. Google it. There's a senator from Oregon, Senator Jeff Merkley, along with a few others, have put together the Abolition Amendment to take out that except following conviction for a crime, because that's critically important. We must take that out. And the final thing I'll say is this. For those of you who haven't read that report, again, great job by District Attorney Larry Krasner and his entire staff. I can summarize that report for you with a basic question. And the question goes like this. If tomorrow you had to be a defendant in a criminal case, and all things are equal, same job, same education, same neighborhood, same religion, but you had to go to court as a black defendant or a white defendant, which one would you choose? This report addresses that. If, as you're leaving a party tomorrow night, and you're driving up Broad Street near Temple University, and lights and sirens from a police car pull up behind you, and as the driver, same car, same suit, same education, same everything, but as that cop approaches you, you could be a black driver or a white driver. Which one would you select? This report by District Attorney Larry Krasner begins to address that question and provide answers. Let's give a big round of applause to John Brown with a law degree, Larry Krasner.
I'm going to bring up the DA in a minute for any questions. Just want to give a shout out to all the Data Lab. I see the director, Oren Gurr, here. Thank you so much for all your work and support on this. And so all of you, CJ, Terrell, Kate Kelly, who put up with my writing and made it much better. Thank you so much for all of what you do. And I also support for those at Eastern Penitentiary here. Sean Kelly, thank you so much for your hospitality here. Appreciate the effort here to make center a museum around ending mass incarceration and to have it in a form of prison. That's a powerful message. We thank you for your work. I'm excited about what's to come. What's to come is that we're going to do some work internally within the DA's office, because we know for reality that all of the information listed here, we still have some work to do there. But we're also going to be moving to have some kind of community forum in the early fall that will talk about a real agenda around this data, an agenda that most of you already have, but if we can put it all together in one agenda and push together for change, I know we can make a real difference to reduce these racial disparities. I'm wearing one of the issues right here, one of the change things, 57 blocks, something we've been working on, that talks about the real investment in the neighborhoods and in the communities that need them the most, the disinvestment that has happened in black and brown communities for over the last 100 years. This is one of the solutions to racial disparities, and there are more, and let's build an agenda together. Let's build an agenda together. Let's build an agenda together for real change for our city, for our state, and for our nation. Now I bring to you District Attorney Larry Krasner.
So, excuse me, the thing about movements is they are led by people. Sometimes they hire lawyers to be technicians just like you hire car mechanics to fix your car. But movements are led by the grassroots. They're led by people. They're led by your neighbors. They're led by activists. That's how movements work. And I say that because my name keeps popping up in all kinds of interesting ways, by the way. But the credit is not mine in any sense at all. Number one, I want the people in the data lab who are hiding in their t-shirts and their funny hats. I want the people from the DA's office who spent years on this, who submitted drafts of it to community leaders to get input. I want you up here because you are going to be in this picture, like it or not. Let's go. Come on. Let's go.
Come on.
You can't. Come on. Come on.
Come on.
Up here. Come on, CJ. You can't hide. You can run, but you cannot hide. Where's Kate? Come on, Kate. All right. Number one, thank you for the incredible work that you did on this. This was a tremendous undertaking, even though it's only a start of a process incredibly important. Number two, I'm going to ask anyone who actually served time in Eastern State Penitentiary when it was open, I'm going to ask you to stand up. And if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to come forward as well, because your voice needs to be heard along with the other voices. And then, last but not least, I'm going to ask all of you who do incredible work in the community, no offense, journalists, you do too, but you do it in a different way. I'm going to ask all of you who do incredible work in the community around criminal justice, around racism, around social justice. I'm going to ask you to come up here too, because we all know who's getting the work done, and it's not me. Come on up here, don't hide. Up here by the podium, please. Come on up here. So this, what you see now, this is what a movement looks like. This is part of the crew that is going to lead the mission to take these numbers and figure out what to do next. And if my office can somehow provide a platform or the opportunity for people in the community who need to lead this, to lead it, we're going to do that while the lawyers, who are nothing more than technicians, are present but over in the corner. That is what we are going to do. It is my pleasure at this time to entertain any questions there may be from the media. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
So can you put the report in a national context? I mean, is there any precedent for this anywhere else in the country?
I'm going to ask one of my authors of the report to address that. I think I know the answer, but I probably don't. Wes, do you want to address that? Kate, do you want to address it? Wes and Kate, do you want to address it? Come on, let's go. You can run, but you can't hide.
There are some jurisdictions now in Colorado who have released their own public data dashboards with race. They haven't released the accompanying context that this report holds. And I think most other reports of this nature are done in partnership with external researchers, which has an advantage and value. There's also other studies on racial disparities going on in partnership with our data lab with researchers at Penn. But I think this type of report and the intentionality around community engagement and giving historical context is probably unprecedented in the U.S.
And has anything been done on a federal level then? Are you saying that nothing's been done on a federal level of this nature?
I would not be able to speak to that. I mostly looked at DA-type jurisdictions and dashboards of that nature.
All right, yes, please.
Hi, I'm from the Enquirer.
My apologies for pointing, by the way.
No worries, it's fine. I read the full report before coming here, and I was very taken by some remarks about the role in which the DA's office has played in perpetuating racism. But the report doesn't go into specifics. So what, in your view, historically was the DA's role, the DA's office's role in where we ended up today? And do you view it as your administration's responsibility specifically to remediate that former role?
Number one, it is absolutely our responsibility to remediate that role. It has always been the responsibility of every prosecutor in the United States to remediate that role, because their sworn oath is to seek justice. And racism, hatred, bigotry, discrimination, by definition, are injustice. So it has always been our role to do that. What do I see as being that role? I can certainly speak with great specificity to my now 36 years as an attorney, 30 of which I spent as a civil rights and a criminal defense attorney. So on the relatively powerless side of this whole system, and 6 of which I have spent on the relatively more powerful side, which is the prosecutor's side. And what I have seen in little and big ways, in intentional and unintentional ways from the very beginning, has been racism. And it has been picking on poor people, which is often pretty close to the same thing, given the economics and the economic demographics of our country. I think maybe one of the simplest ways to look at it is this. Who crashed the U.S. economy? What was it, 08? Who crashed the U.S. economy? A whole bunch of white guys. And how many of them went to jail?
None.
Not a whole bunch of white guys. That's what happened. Now, how is that possible? How is it possible you can crash the entire U.S. economy and be looking at less trouble than if you stole food? How is it possible that you can run a giant opioid manufacturing or opioid distribution or opioid retailing business and become a billionaire off of that?
Come on.
And not to a day of jail time, but a 16-year-old black or brown kid who sells 3 little bags of heroin to the people you got addicted is looking at jail.
Come on.
The reality is the system is deeply racist. The unintentional part of that is just as interesting as the intentional part of that. And my predecessors, certainly every single one who I observed closely, perpetuated that. And we need to change that every way we can. I'll just one final comment, because I do think someone a lot smarter than me said something pretty smart about hate in general, a big part of which is racial discrimination, which is that it's very much like a disease. We are bombarded with germs every day in our lives, and we fight different ways, washing our hands, for example, or taking the right medication, whatever it may be, so that it doesn't kill us. Well, this smart person, not me, said racism is just like that. You have to dedicate yourself every day to not letting it infect you. You have to dedicate yourself every day to trying to do something about others who are already infected, because if you do that, we can actually make some progress, as we have with disease. All right, are there any other questions? Yes, sir.
Were you shocked to see the numbers when you first read the report?
No, I was not shocked. As I stated, I've been in the system for a very long time. Pennsylvania, in some ways, has a more shameful record than some of the other states. And I say that with regret, because I love this state and I love this city. But I was not shocked based upon what I've seen in the courtroom, and I'm not shocked based upon what I have read from criminologists and scholars around these issues.
You know, a lot of the report deals with police stops, police arrests, but I don't see any representatives from the police department here. Do they have these numbers? Have you been in contact with them about some of the numbers you guys have found?
We are in contact with Philadelphia Police Department all the time. A lot of the data here actually is Philadelphia Police data. But I think it's important to understand this is not a blame game. You know, we are not here to throw rocks. That will advance nothing. This is about getting the numbers, putting numbers to a problem, so that we can try to fix the problem. And I look forward to working with all of our law enforcement partners on these issues. Are there any other questions from media?
Right here.
Yes, sir.
There are some very sharp minds in the penal system. And this particular report and this movement will be very beneficial to get inside the penal system, due to the fact that the minds in there can analyze this report and then turn it over to their people that they can get to real quicker than some of us can get to. And then once they analyze it and see the significance of it, this will grow. And now it only just grow in Pennsylvania, it will grow statewide, all around. So I believe that this book should get inside the penal system, and it also should get inside the parole system.
Yes, sir. I think you raise a very interesting point. If you go into the green door right over there, you'll see a small museum that talks, among other things, about the existence of press and media within jails and within prisons, and how many different publications there are, some of them actually really excellent publications. This report should be with people who are in custody. There is no question that there are people in custody who not only have bright ideas, but are actually very, very learned. They've had plenty of time to read, and they've read a lot of things. Their families have been deeply affected by it, and their families may have all kinds of helpful input. Yes, we should do that. We should also be providing this to victim advocacy groups, because as I'm sure you know, the vast majority of the victims of violent crime in the city of Philadelphia are also black and brown. This is a report that I certainly hope will go every direction it can, because that is how a movement progresses, and this must be led by the community, by the grassroots. It cannot be led by lawyers like any movement. All right, are there any other questions? Yes, please.
I have one for the researchers. Of the recommendations at the end of the report, which would you say is the most important or urgent to enact?
You will have to come to the microphone or you will not be picked up.
I think there's two things here, right? So I think in the very short term, one thing that is very important is to I'm just gonna pull up the thing just so I know what I'm talking about here. Address data and that's easy. That's the easy thing to do. Like, we can fix data collection, data sharing. So that was number 3. I think the most important one, and the one that's going to lead to better long-term outcomes overall, is investing in neighborhoods and community organizations. Putting your money where your mouth is, helping community members that are doing the work to address the racial disparities that ultimately lead to racial injustice, racial inequalities later in the justice system. We're talking about this report sort of talks about what's happening downstream from the problems that are coming upstream. So I think of all of the recommendations, that's the most important one. That's the one to focus on, and that's where policy should be directed.
So let me just add to that, if I may, because I think Wes has raised a really important point, which is a lot of what we see in the criminal justice system causes the problem of discrimination, but a lot of what we see in the criminal justice system is just a symptom of racism that occurred outside of the criminal justice system. When you are reading this report, and I hope you are, I got some more reading for you, and that's a book called Poverty by America, written by a man named Matthew Desmond. If you look over here at this sculpture when we're done, you'll see 1970. And then you'll see 2020 over there, which is pretty much the same as how it would look in 2022. Well, that's a 50-year period. That's the same time when we have supposedly been fighting poverty. And yes, we actually spend more money fighting poverty than ever before. We have made no progress on poverty. All that has happened with mass incarceration is it's got worse and worse. That anti-poverty money, our social safety net, most of it goes to rich people. That's the truth. That's the reality. Or it goes to people in government who are supposedly working on reducing poverty. It's not going to poor people. We got to dig in on some of this stuff. It is okay to make progress on poverty. It is okay to make progress on public safety and to reduce incarceration as we do it, because we know for sure that mass incarceration and the racism that underlies it have not worked. Are there any other questions? All right. Yes, please. So just so we can keep this moving, I will say yes, there is some discussion about probation and parole in there. It's an issue that we identified very early. In 2018, when we first came into office, the rate of being supervised on probation or parole in Philadelphia was almost 25 times higher. I did not say 2.5 times higher. I said 25 times higher than the city of New York. You can get in your car right now and be in New York in 90 minutes. It was 25 times higher in Philadelphia. And that is part of the reason that early on, understanding the science that being supervised for more than 3 years does more harm than good. And that is the science. Yes. That's part of the reason that early on we introduced policies within our office, and I understand that's a minimal step, but policies within our office to try to reduce this culture of incredibly long periods of supervision that were just making things worse. A piece of good news for you, and then we'll conclude with that. When we came up with a policy that said ordinarily do not seek more than 3 years of supervision. If the law requires it, do it. But if you have a choice, do not seek more than 3 years unless you have special reasons. When we did that, we saw this. We saw that for black defendants and brown defendants, they used to get much higher levels of supervision than white defendants for the same thing. But when we put a ceiling on that by saying don't do more than 3 unless you got a good reason, it didn't get right, but it got a whole lot better. I'm sure this will be no surprise to you, but when some judges look out and they see a white defendant and a black defendant for the same crime, with the same work record, with the same prior record, with the same, somehow in their gut, maybe on purpose, maybe not even knowing it, they just know the black man needs 5 years and the white man only needs 18 months.
That's right.
Because he's from a, quote, good family, unquote. This is how unintentional, sometimes intentional, this is how racism works. And so I'm happy to say that's one small area where we have made a little bit of progress. I can tell you that before the pandemic hit and messed up all data, we had reduced the future years of supervision on probation and parole by about 2/3. And there is no indication whatsoever that that has harmed public safety.